Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me today, it's the one, the only, it's Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. It's good to be back. It's, we're another week out. We do have a Stanley Cup champion, and we'll be talking about that in a little bit. We also have a 2020 NHL Draft Preview.
It only feels like 2021.
It feels like 2027, but here we are.
Yeah.
And we'll be going through all that later in the show, but we did want to kick it off with a little bit of Flyers news. There's not a ton, but we've been talking on this show the last couple of weeks about the Flyers free agents, and we've kind of been speculating on what some of them might get. And we have a couple of those answers. Robert Hagg, 2-year extension at $1.6 million annually. And Brian Elliott got a 1-year extension worth $1.5 million. Kevin, any surprises here, really?
No. And
not at all?
No, not at all. And actually, I mean...
The biggest surprise was Brian Elliott actually taking a pay cut?
Maybe. I mean, it's pretty close to that. That's why it's such a good deal. I mean, I'm going to hold on Elliott for a second because Robert Hagg was, in typical fashion for our show, it happened on, Monday?
Within 24
like we posted
hours,
the
for
episode,
sure.
and 2 hours later, it was they tweet, and I love the way they tweeted it out. By the way, the team tweeted it out. Now you're going to get a new deal, Bobby, which is a Kevin Hayes reference for anybody who doesn't know what Kevin Hayes does before warm-ups.
Yeah.
You know? So, but nonetheless, like I looked at the terms of that deal, and we kind of off air chatted a little bit about it, and I kind of filled everybody in that he was supposed to get a qualifying offer of 1.3 anyway, and he's arbitration eligible. I'm not worried about $300,000 for 2 years. When
no, not at all.
You know,
especially because the Flyers are, knock on wood, in relatively good shape cap-wise.
Right, and I think that given the timing of that news, and following Nick Aube-Kubel getting re-signed, and as we'll get into with Brian Elliott too, very clearly there's an emphasis on taking care of the players within the system that you want to keep.
Absolutely.
And then going into this particular week and saying, what do we have left to work with? And what do we have to do if we want to do anything different? I mean, there's nothing really wrong with running this thing back, quite honestly.
No, honestly, the team got you to the game 7 of the second round in the circumstances that they played in this year. And if you recall, they were the second hottest team in hockey at the pause. Who knows what would have happened if there was no pandemic? You know what I mean? And
there's nothing to say that if it was a normal offseason, if you get a normal bump in the cap slightly and you still make this, there's nothing that says you don't make the same exact deals you're trying to make right now.
Absolutely.
It's just, it would give you more but it would give you more flexibility going forward that you don't sit there and go,
you could just trade for Patrik Laine.
Well, yeah. Well,
the Flyers had more cap space. They could trade for Patrik Laine. It's fine.
Well, and look, I wrote down Laine on my list of possible trade targets. I'm not saying that it's not can they, and one of the sentiments I've seen about guys who are rumored in trades, and there's two obvious ones out there if you're not paying any attention, it's Patrik Laine and Johnny Gaudreau.
Yep.
And
both of them have been tied to Philadelphia for a variety of reasons.
And Gaudreau makes a ton of sense in that regard because
there's a ton of connections.
Everybody who is piecing that together has it right.
He's a South Jersey boy. He's got 2 years left on his deal. He was college roommates with Kevin Hayes.
Yep.
Come on,
there's a whole connection there, and it makes a lot of sense. And
he's talked about wanting to be a Flyer.
And you know what? He's at a crossroads in his career because he just had one of the worst offensive years he's had, following the best offensive year he had, and that's when that mindset comes in. Does a change of scenery work for him? I mean, he's been in Calgary his entire career to this point, and that's
maybe I need to go home.
Well, and you got to remember, he's one of these kids that started at 20 and has now been in the league for 6 years.
Yep.
Like this is, I'm not comparing the style of player when I say this, but this is a Sean Couturier style where he's up early.
Yeah.
And that means that he's been around for a long time, even though he's 26.
Right.
He's
got a lot of miles.
You don't think about him as honestly, you think, how long has he been in the league? He's got to be 29.
He's an established veteran, right?
Right. Like you think he's got to be 29, pushing 30. And then especially when you hear the name that's tied in the rumors, which I don't think is going anywhere, but a lot of people have talked about how it's a Jake Voracek for Gaudreau, almost straight up move or something like that.
It can't be.
I don't know if that's going to be I don't know. I don't believe there's any substance to that whatsoever.
You don't think there's any fire in that smoke?
I think there's smoke. I don't think it means that's the exact conversation. I do think that there's smoke that you're calling, or not only calling, I thought it was a really good way of wording it because they were talking about what Elliott Friedman said on 31 Thoughts this week.
I was going to mention that too. Yeah.
Which was that the Flyers are going to be talked about a lot when it comes to trade rumors.
Yep.
And his reasoning was fair, as in, if the rest of the league sits there and says, you've got Shane Gostisbehere, Travis Sanheim, Phil Myers, Ivan Provorov. No, I know they're not getting rid of Ivan Provorov, but the point being, you've got 3 other guys below him who
it's a very
are
good,
young,
talented young defensive core.
and there's a lot of guys there. You're going to get phone calls, and you're going to get calls from people who are sitting here saying, "Are you willing to move blank for?" And then and Chuck Fletcher will probably sit there and go, "Well, for what? What are we talking?" And if it doesn't blow him away, he's not doing a thing.
Right.
But if you sit there and center the package around, it's Johnny Gaudreau for, like, and I'm not trying to say I wouldn't trade Johnny Gaudreau trade for Johnny Gaudreau and trade Travis Sanheim. Like, I wouldn't.
No, absolutely not.
But I'm sitting here saying
I would trade Jake Voracek. I know we talked about that, but I would do that.
There was a rumor deal, and again, this is what Twitter does because they hear a name and they almost want to will it into existence. I think it was something that was supposed to be Jake Voracek and somehow Jake Voracek and Shane Gostisbehere for Gaudreau and TJ Brody, which sounds too good to be true.
That's
quite honestly,
far too good to be true. Yeah,
because Brody even is a good fit with
right.
where
And
the
Shane
Flyers are at
Gostisbehere
the
struggled
moment.
to be the 6th defenseman this year.
I don't see a team taking on that much cap space to give you 2 players that they know exactly who they are to. Like,
right.
We had this conversation, or I've mentioned this about like the buildup of the Flyers before, that no matter what, wherever you decide to move them in the lineup moving forward, you know what Claude Giroux is, you know what Jake Voracek is, you know what James Van Riemsdyk is, and so on.
Right.
Like, you know what to expect from them. You hope there's more, but you know what to expect. And Calgary certainly by this point knows what to expect from Johnny Gaudreau and from TJ Brody. So if you're going to move somebody, you're doing it to really shake things up and say, we need new blood. And are you going to do it, though, for a 31-year-old forward and a 27-year-old defenseman and instantly get older? I don't think they're going to do that.
One of the things you mentioned, Elliott Friedman on 31 Thoughts this past week.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing he said in conversation was that Brad Treliving, the Calgary Flames GM, is one of the more active GMs in the league in terms of taking phone calls and being at the center of a lot of conversations. And it doesn't necessarily mean there's deals there, but
right.
a lot. Brad Treliving is apparently a very, very active GM. He's calling a lot. There's a lot of trade offers. So maybe pump the brakes a little bit on a Calgary deal, right? I don't know if Johnny Gaudreau is, quote unquote, coming home yet.
Right.
But I do think there's definitely been a conversation, right? Because there is that South Jersey connection. There is that Kevin Hayes connection.
Right.
Johnny Gaudreau's a Gloucester Catholic boy. And I think there's been whispers out of Calgary for a couple of years that they're worried about losing him for nothing at the end of his contract. That at the end, he's going to walk and come to Philly. That's kind of the thing. And I don't know how true that is. I don't know if, they have had conversations with Johnny. Obviously, I'm sure they have. But he has made it known that he wants to be a Flyer at some point in his career. Yeah, that also kind of drives the price down, right? If you're Calgary, and, we saw it last year with Winnipeg and Jacob Trouba.
Yeah.
You didn't get a huge return out of Jacob Trouba, who, when you traded him, was a top-tier defenseman and looked like he was going to be, break out and have an insane year and blah, blah, blah. But he only wanted to go to the New York Rangers, so the price came down.
Right, and that's a really interesting comparison because you think about what the Jets did last offseason, and Trouba had to get moved so they could get his rights, so they could sign him because that's where he wanted to go.
Right.
And they did the same thing to try to open some stuff up when they traded Kevin Hayes and his rights to the Flyers. And you almost sit there and you go, who had the better year? Which guy was more talked about, and then who had the better year?
Well, sure.
It's kind of interesting how that plays out. So just because there's smoke and there's talks, it doesn't always mean you're getting like the best guy. And I've read some stuff around, right now I know Laine, because he's another one who gets a lot of talking. There's definitely smoke to that, and not necessarily with the Flyers, but there's smoke because
I think there are smoldering embers.
Well,
it might not be full-blown fire yet, but that's a problem. Patrik Laine will not be a Winnipeg Jet by the end of the offseason, I don't think.
I don't think so either, and I think that the reason for that, and
he might move on Tuesday.
Very possibly, and the reason being is they've got to move cap. They've got to move cap,
and you know what I'm concerned about? He might move to the Metro.
He might, but the key here with him is, and again, this is why I caution people who want to see it happen so badly on with the Flyers is, I'm not saying he doesn't have room to grow. He's 22 years old, so I mean, come on. But there are two things that strike me that I don't love about him.
Consistency is going to be one of them, right?
Well, it's his consistency, not just as a scorer, but defensively.
Well, there is no consistency defensively.
Well, he's started to grow in that area a little bit over the last season, but it's still such a work in progress that you almost don't want to bring in a guy who takes everything that you worked on last year. And like we were talking about this during the previous season, where it was, look how much Jake Voracek is involved on the defensive side when we never knew him to be a defensive player. And the reason for that is because he's buying into the system.
Yeah.
He's listening to, he's kind of dealing with the consequences of the coaching staff. It was a difference. It wasn't Dave Haxel anymore. This is Alain Vigneault. Welcome to Alain Vigneault. You're going to work on at all ends of the ice, or your time's going down. And that was how it was going to work. And sure, that could work with Laine. Don't get me wrong. The thing that concerns me the most about him is it's a rental right now. He is a rental for whoever gets him at the moment. And are you going to be willing to pay this guy, especially with flat cap again?
Money.
Nothing about that trade makes sense with what Chuck Fletcher said earlier in the offseason.
About being patient and letting the guys
We're not even
grow.
about being patient, but also about making decisions that are going where you know what you're getting 3 years out. Then none of that makes sense. Johnny Gaudreau, you got 2 years of his contract left, and it's a technically, depending on who you trade, you could shed cap space
A little bit, yeah.
to do it.
Definitely.
I mean, like a little bit. I'm not talking about extremes, but depending on what you do, like if you were to trade Jake Voracek for Johnny Gaudreau,
if Jake Voracek goes the other way, you're saving money.
Well, and if you have to sweeten that deal because Voracek is 4 years older and has $1.5 million more, then
no move clause, I believe, right?
No, he doesn't.
Oh no, he doesn't.
Only
I'm sorry.
Giroux
He's always the one I think has a no move clause, but doesn't.
It feels like he does. That's why
that contract is a no move clause.
It sort of feels but people keep saying though it's the way the salaries distributed. There's a distribution of the salary that it's like, hey, you might be able to move him and attract a team because even with the cap hit, it's still not, you're not paying him as much specifically like in the way the deal is structured. But that being said,
for example, I actually have it up here. His base
good.
salary this year is $2.25 million. His base salary next year is 7.5. So that's going to be a tough one. And then
I think
the remaining 2 years, right? There's a $5 million bonus in 22-23. And then it ends in 23-24 at him making 7.5. So he's making 7.5 next year and the last year of the deal. But that middle deal, he's making it slightly less, 6.25 total.
Right, but it's next year that I think matters when it comes to this, because of the fact that he has less money that he's owed and the bonuses have already been paid because of where the offseason starts and things like that. Like the bonuses have been paid. So the Flyers have already covered his bonus.
I think there's a real chance
whatever
Jake
team
Voracek
gets him
traded next offseason. Yeah.
Well, no, I don't. I don't think so because of the fact that at that point in time, then not only do you get the cap hit, but you get the pay too.
Right. Well, next year they have that $5 million bonus. That's what I'm saying. Not this summer. It's not coming this summer, but next summer, Jake Voracek's getting a $5 million bonus.
Well, no, I think he already got paid the bonus this year is what it is. So there's nothing owed on the bonus. So he gets $2.5 million from whoever has him next year when they actually start playing.
Okay.
And no team's on the hook for the bonus. I mean, you're getting the $8.2 million cap hit.
And obviously this is all subject to, the players playing at 80% or whatever this year. But that's a story for another day.
Well, that's a story when we actually have substance on that, because right now, I mean, they're a week removed from handing out the Stanley Cup and they are already thinking about things, but I'm sure that the week, some of the things in the week around other sports are going to bring caution to this a little bit. But then again, here's the thing about that too, that's a good thing because it's already a learning experience. They haven't even started that discussion really, and they're already having a learning experience. They're going to have to go in knowing that one thing is certain. These players are not going to spend a whole year in a bubble. It's going to have to be done in a certain way where they're not. And are you going to be able to test them regularly and, make sure that they don't do anything outside of the game
anything
itself.
Extra risky.
And I think that to an extent, some of them will accept things like that because of the fact that they're at least home with their families.
Right.
If you told them you can't go anywhere, but you're allowed to see your family every single day.
You're still allowed to live in your house.
With the exception of the road trips you're going to take to play away games in presumably empty arenas, you're still allowed to see your family and do everything with them the way that you normally would. And now, granted, do you have to hope that your families don't do anything? Kind of.
Sure.
But at the same time,
the NHL can't police everybody.
No, but at least you're getting tested daily. Like if you get tested daily and you can track it as quickly as possible, and keep everybody up to date on what the situation is and if you're not feeling well and also, and you know what, we'll see. I mean, I thought I saw a report somewhere, a semi-report that was like that some of the players are being told to prepare for November training camps still.
Wow.
And at the very least, I think that the idea is that New Year's Day is on the table.
This might I've heard New Year's Day is on the table as well. This might be the pessimist in me, but I'll kind of believe it when I say it, especially given the struggles that the NFL has run into this week. I think the NHL was kind of planning on adopting the NFL method, and that has now proven that it's not as foolproof as we thought it was a week ago, maybe.
It is and it's not, though, because and here's what I mean when I say that. It worked for 3 weeks to this point, obviously, but aside from that, baseball had to pull it off too, and baseball had its struggles early, and we said, oh my God, this is never going to work. Look what happened. You let them go wherever they wanted to go, and you didn't bubble them in these cities and all that stuff. You should have just found a place to go. And to be fair, they're running their playoffs in a bubble system, by the way,
right?
Which is interesting.
And now the NFL is talking about
the NFL should talk about playoffs in a bubble.
Well, they're talking about breaking for a couple of weeks and coming back in a semi-bubble. I don't know how
but they can't afford to do it. That's the problem. I don't think they can.
I think you're probably right, but either way,
from a scheduling standpoint, but
this is all stuff we can't control.
Oh no. But so the point being, though, is baseball had a lot of problems in the very first month, and then we didn't hear near as many stories about cases. Like we never had after that. We definitely never had another team in baseball that really, like after the first month, that turned into half the team just got it.
Right.
Like we had, this guy's going to miss a day. The team decided to cancel today's game. They're all getting tested, and everybody would come back and say, and everybody would say, okay, everybody's negative, so we feel confident going forward. That's the only way you can do it. Like, even if the NHL had cases during phase 2 like they did, you took those players out of the equation. What was the largest breakout that the NHL had? It's not to say it was foolproof, but the largest breakout was what? The 5 guys, ironically, with Tampa Bay.
Yeah. And there was that flight over with the Czech players that was a little questionable, and that ended up being, one suspected case.
The flight was suspect, but
there were no issues.
But it's I'm saying from a standpoint of what individual team could sit there and say it was in our locker room at one point in time.
Nobody.
We had 1, and then it turned from 1 into 5 into whatever.
13,
they didn't have
right.
Nobody had that in the NHL. Like
nope.
You had the occasional one-off. It never shut anything down. And credit to the NHL, by the way, as we shift gears a little bit to the Stanley Cup stuff.
Yeah, I was going to get there. Yeah.
They pulled it off. I mean, we kind of kept saying that they were going to because we were seeing the progress, but it's over. It's official, and what a great story for that to go out the way it did and things like that. But to close out the Flyers trade stuff and all that.
And I'm sure we will circle back around on that when we get to the draft.
This is where I want to go with this kind of, so to speak, because definitely, where there's smoke, it's all well and good, because I do think that this is the way that teams are trying to improve this year, is to talk trade a little bit, to see what you can get rid of to then get new.
I think there's going to be more moving and shaking at this draft than we've seen in a very long time.
And I don't think it's even going to be specifically the draft itself, because to be quite honest with you, I don't think you're going to see a lot of pick swaps this year. I think a lot of people want to keep whatever picks they have.
A lot of salary
and do that. But I do think that this is going to be, and it's interesting because Chuck Fletcher kind of said that there's no increase in conversation or decrease in conversation just because they're not sitting in the same room during the draft or whatnot. Like, everybody is still kind of checking up the same amount as normal, and everybody is kind of going to do things the same way they did it before, because you still are going to make that phone call. You're not going to, you're not going to just make it. No one's walking to the table to make a deal anymore, it feels like. But
I feel like that's kind of going out the window anyway.
Well, you go over, you discuss maybe something and just say, hey, hold on, we might give you a call later. That's how I think some of the deals come to be an idea, but I don't think that that's actually when it comes down to it, you're making the trade off of a couple more phone calls to the other table. Right. But to go back to the 2 players, because Robert Hagg wasn't surprised, and Brian Elliott giving you a pay cut.
Oh yeah.
Huge. And listen, there was a lot of interesting news around the NHL, and we've already talked about the number of free agent goalies that are out there, which certainly drew some attention. And I saw 2 different names.
And I think that's why his price was a little bit lower, because he knows the market's a little flooded this year.
I think for one, but also, so there's 2 things about this at this point in time, because there's 2 names that were floating around that I saw that people were trying to connect to the Flyers the way that we just talked about with trades. One of them is kind of interesting because possibly on the move, Devin Dubnyk.
I've heard that name floating around.
And now granted, the location I have heard, by the way, which makes a ton of sense, by the way, is San Jose, which makes a ton of sense. But
I think I've heard Carolina too, but Carolina's got to be looking for a goalie. Right?
Sure. But so that's the first one, and I get it. People want to try to connect the dots and go, well, Chuck Fletcher's had him for the longest time. He knows what he'd get from him. And, like, everybody wants to just put him right behind Carter Hart and say that's what it's going to be. Okay, and then the other one is the
not going to lie, I wouldn't hate it for a year or two.
No, you wouldn't hate it, but see, I'll make a comparison to this in a minute. That'll kind of explain why it wasn't possible or why it's not possible. Because then the other name that comes out, and I believe this was midweek that we started to hear the rumblings it was going to happen, and I think it finally went official on Thursday or Friday, was Henrik Lundqvist.
Yeah.
And the buyout. And everybody kind of jumped at that too, because almost like as if to say the guy who beat you up, who had your number for all those years, now bring him in and he's the perfect mentor for the kid. Everybody wanted it to be, and everybody wanted it to be that. And here's the thing, okay? You tell me if you're getting Henrik Lundqvist, and I don't see it this way. I don't believe for a second that Henrik Lundqvist is not playing next year if he does decide to play, unless he retires.
Man, I don't know. I think he might say,
no way,
you know what? I'm good.
Well, and he might, but I think that if he's going to play next year, no way is he playing for anything less than $3 million.
See, I don't know, because I think Hank wants a cup. And I think he's going to look at a team and go, I think you might have a chance to win a cup. I would like to come here. Like
that would be interesting.
If, for example, if you're, let's say, Kyle Dubas in Toronto, and you're trading Freddie Anderson, because that's something that has been bandied about. You make a run with Henrik Lundqvist and Jack Campbell as your duo.
I'm trying to picture it right now. See, but all right, but you did touch on at least the other point that I want to make about Henrik Lundqvist and the people who were saying, "Oh, come on, let the Flyers sign him. He's going to be the perfect mentor for Carter Hart." Right? Here's the thing: do you think he's really going to play if he's not getting starting time?
Right.
I don't think he's just going to slot. Like, let's put it this way: look at what the Flyers just did with Brian Elliott for a minute and the pay cut and the $1.5 million that he's going to make. Okay. Now look at Montreal. You're the Flyers who have two goalies who you trust, who work well off of each other,
that are making
and who
$2 million
that can give you results, who are making about $2.5 million, and Montreal is going to spend $14 million on goaltending next year. You don't need to pile that much money into two of them. You need a guy who's capable.
You know what? They have the cap space. They have the luxury. Go for it.
They do until you realize
that I believe 1 year left on his deal.
Yeah, well, I'd love to see the qualifying offers they made though to the other free agents, because, what kind of qualifying offer are you making a player like Max Domi? And what's your cap going to look like once you re-sign everybody?
Right.
But something about this just doesn't sound.
They obviously feel like they have a lot of cap space. They're the ones who offer sheeted Sebastian Aho last year, right? They're the ones who, we've heard rumors that they might do it again this year, and I don't think they're going to. But
it'll be really interesting for offer sheets if they even happen. But
that's what I'm saying. Like, Montreal clearly feels like they have a decent enough cap situation that they can do that kind of thing. They were willing to sign Sebastian Aho for what, $7 million, $8 million a year?
Yeah, they do. But there's a difference for me between looking at a guy like Sebastian Aho who transforms your offense, even re-signing a guy like Jeff Petrie who was solid. You want to establish a core on the on defensive side going forward.
I do not like that contract, by the way.
Well, I think you're not going to like it down the road more.
Right, it's a little on the long side.
Right. But to say that you want two goalies at $14 million is a big, I can see you allocating the money and saying we have room to take a risk and sign a big name at a bigger contract and add it to our 12 forwards or our 6 defensemen to continue to build that out and have the one guy who is established as the guy around the rest of in the middle of all these other guys and have all the other guys around him. We still know Carey Price is the goalie though. This is legitimately you're paying $4.5 million to your backup.
Well, right. And on Henrik Lundqvist real quick, it's going to come down to, does Henrik Lundqvist want to play or does Henrik Lundqvist want to win a Stanley Cup?
Sure.
Because he could very easily go sign once Vegas trades away Marc-Andre Fleury, which they're going to do because they signed Robin Lehner to a 5-year, $25 million extension. Once they trade Marc-Andre Fleury away, Henrik Lundqvist would be a really good backup to go play 35 under Robin Lehner. Again, if he wants to go win a cup, he'll sign for $2 million somewhere and go be a backup and blah, blah, blah. if he wants to start, he could probably go to a team like Minnesota or one of these teams that need a goalie, right?
Right. I mean, Minnesota, then, like, you're right, because then Minnesota, you kind of take the cup contender thing out of play.
Exactly. Do you want to make the money or do you want the cup? And I think at this point in his career, I think there's a real chance he wants the cup.
Well, and here's the thing, too. And for people who, again, you're saying something about Lundqvist coming to wherever. Do you really, like, for Lundqvist or the Flyers, I'm saying, like, for people who wanted that to be a thing, do you really think that at 38 years old, Henrik Lundqvist is going to turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to go to a team and play behind a 22-year-old instead of any, like, there's, like, you get to a certain point where you go, it's my time. Like, and then hear me out. What I'm saying, like, when I say this is that Brian Elliott knows his place at this point in time.
Right.
He knows he's not going to be the number one guy. He knows there's a comfort level in Philadelphia. He's, your family is starting to become established in this area. You're living here. You spent 3 years here. You've also had three probably decent years, because for two of them, you were pretty much the primary starter when healthy for two of them. And then for the third one, you literally did factor into the equation because you got a near, I don't want to say equal number of starts, but you got a decent number of starts with a surefire stud in goal right now, who showed it in the playoff, by the way, but you still got your number called and didn't look bad. Your playoff numbers were fine. It wasn't you.
Right.
And I think he knows that. And I think at 35, he sits there and he goes, they're trending in the right direction. I have a few years left. I'll definitely take the chance on the one here, and I will pull back, and I'm not going to go crazy with it because I don't feel the need to do anything differently right now, right? But you need a goalie who accepts that, because the Flyers 2 years ago had Cam Talbot in the system and could have turned around and said, you know what, Cam, we want you to be the guy who –
they also had Mike McKenna in the system, and Peter Mrazek in the system.
Mike McKenna retired before he got the chance to be retained in the system.
But the Flyers had a lot of goalies in the system.
Mrazek is sort of the same case, but Cam Talbot is really – the guy I'm going to focus on with this, because Cam Talbot's a good comparison. He starts his career. He works his way up. He's not the fastest developer. And we have seen, like we've talked about this with Carter Hart, it's rare to find a guy who at 20 years old
23
says, I'm breaking through to the NHL. And then by 22, you go, no question about it. He can win series in the playoffs. He's good.
Right. Would you be surprised? Would you be surprised if I told you Carter Hart was a Vezina finalist in the next 3 years?
Depending on what he does in the regular season as a whole, and how many starts he gets.
You wouldn't be stunned by it.
I need to see his usage. I need to see his usage, and I need to see him be more of a guy, not who steals games, but like what I want to see is like the goalies who we tend to see in the Vezina are the ones who you sit there and you go, when Vasilevsky's in goal, when Hellebuck's in goal, when Tuukka Rask is in goal, you start to get a vibe that nothing's getting by him that night. And Carter Hart still has that moment where one of them sneaks through, and it doesn't necessarily factor in the game. Like, he still makes 30-something saves.
They still win 3-1, right?
But he's not that kind of dominant yet that I think he needs to get to in order to be considered a Vezina finalist.
But I don't think you'd be surprised to see that out of him in the next couple of years, right? I've definitely seen flashes of it, right? I was in attendance for the home opener this past year, the shutout win against the New Jersey Devils, and you could just tell that night nothing was getting by him. He had that night.
He had those moments where you definitely did say that, and then toward the end of it, because
I will point to the Taylor Hall 5-on-3 save.
Well, sure, and see, the thing that I point out with that is at that time it was still a 1-0 game. So once they took a bigger lead, and you were sitting there at 3-0, probably just going, the only matter of business left really is,
do we get a career first here? Right.
Do
we have a career first? And
because I don't even think you could feel. I don't even think you could feel that way about his 2 shutouts in the Montreal series, because you're too busy looking at the score. You know what I mean? Like, you're not worried about, he's locked in. It's 1-0. If one gets by him, oh boy, it's tied. And they've been pushing more than the Flyers have. You know what I mean? Like, you think more about the score than you do. Like, it definitely comes into your mind where you go, oh, it's 2-0 at a certain point or 3-0 at a certain point. And you go, and they're not beating him tonight.
No.
Wow. Like, imagine this. Like, that was like, let's say this way. I knew that feeling. We'll tie it into the Stanley Cup talk that we're going to get to in just a second. Game 6 felt that way.
I was about to say, we are nearly 30 minutes into the show, and we have not really talked about the Stanley Cup yet. So we should definitely do that.
We will. So to wrap on Brian Elliott really quickly. So Cam Talbot's a guy who doesn't break through the NHL until 26. He plays 2 years behind Henrik Lundqvist. And at some point in time, gets a little bit of exposure to the game. He's playing in a handful of games. Lundqvist is still the guy.
Right.
And at some point in time, a goalie turns around and goes, it's my time. I'm good enough to play in this league. I'm not going to sit behind, even if he's the best player in the world. Because everybody knew at that time, I mean, we're talking 14, 15, Henrik Lundqvist is 32, 33 years old in those years. He's the best goalie in the world at that moment.
Right.
Everybody knows it. So no one's saying anything about Cam Talbot, but at some point in time, he wants to break out and show what he can do. That's when Edmonton comes into play. He goes to Edmonton for a few years. He gets used more than we've seen any goalie get used in the last 7 years, I'd say. No goalie is making 73 starts anymore in a year.
No, it's just that went out the window with Martin Brodeur, honestly.
But it's almost like as soon as Koskinen showed up for Edmonton and it was, oh, look, we're going to start him just as much. Then Talbot wanted the next step. Where can I go to get regular playing time? And it's always seemed to be about that. And, that's why I wonder if Lundqvist at this point in his career, after watching everything, I think, he accepted his fate this year with the Rangers.
He didn't really have much of a choice.
Make a change. And not only that, but when it wasn't just Georgiev, but it was Shesterkin as well. And now there's 2 of them. And 2 of them are
and all of a sudden Henrik
place.
Knows he's the odd man out here.
Sure, he knows, and he's willing to accept it. But I think that plays into his mind that if he's going to come back and play, it's going to be to show he's not, the tank isn't empty yet.
I don't know.
But
he might just say, man, I'm one of the most handsome men on earth. I've been playing hockey at a high level for 20 years. I've made a lot of money. I don't have a ring yet. And I really think there's a chance he goes and signs with – how scary is adding Henrik Lundqvist as a backup to any, playoff team, right? We always talk going into the playoffs about, well, if their goalie gets hurt, they're – and every team is screwed if their goalie gets hurt in the first round of the playoffs. But if Henrik Lundqvist is your backup, you're not so screwed. So, do you think there's a chance that he goes to a team like Vegas or a team like – any team that's close to competing and has a good goalie, right?
Yes, I think there's a chance.
It just takes $1 million and wants to get a ring.
I don't think he takes $1 million though.
How about Colorado?
It's an interesting one. Yeah, because
they have cap space. They got a little room. They don't have a ton going on in the goaltending department. I'm not really a believer in Philip Grubauer and their whole system going on out there. I think there's a chance. I think that would make a lot of sense.
There's a few things that would make some sense for him. I think the bigger question with him right now is, like I said, I don't see him taking low money. I think that at the end of the day, let's put it this way.
Yeah, I disagree on that one.
Well, if you think he's going to take $1 million, then I would have left the door open for the
2 or less. I'll say 2 or less.
But if that's what he was going to do, then I would have left the door open for the Flyers to sign him too at that point in time. I denied that one the second I kept seeing it because my mind went to, he's not just going to come down from whatever he was making to $2 million.
Yeah, but I don't think he would look at the Flyers and think that him as a backup turns them into a Stanley Cup
I'm not saying that
right?
either. I'm just saying and not only that, but from the Flyers standpoint themselves, do you need to introduce a new guy to the locker room for Carter Hart and say, now here's the guy who's
especially when him and Brian Elliott have such a good relationship. That is such a healthy starter-backup dynamic.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught it. Brian Elliott posted throughout his social media, but on Instagram was one of the spots he posted about, bringing it back another year. Let's go, all that stuff like that. And Carter Hart's comment was 2 down on the headline list, and he just tweeted yes, brother, and it's or commented yes, brother, and it's
fantastic.
That's it. That's the dynamic you need.
That's it, man.
They love each other, and it's great, to see that's the way they are. And
I think Brian Elliott probably could have gotten a better deal on the market.
Somebody probably could have, yeah.
Somebody probably would have thrown $2.5, maybe even $3 million.
Somebody would have, you know what? Somebody would have given him starter money.
Right.
And $2.5 is legit, to say that. So somebody would have given him starter money and said, you can start for us or be more of the 1A. Right. And he stayed here. And he took a pay cut knowing the situation.
And I hope that kind of leadership, we're starting to get to a world where we might see guys start taking less to stay here. Yeah, I think we saw it, the start of it last summer with Travis Konechny and Ivan Provorov. Those deals, I like those deals a lot.
Sure.
And I think those deals at this point in time are probably below market value for those players, given the fact that they have 5 years left on them.
And look, free agency is going to be a thing to watch because you need to see what he does during that. But I really struggle to find a contract that Chuck Fletcher's handed out in the 2 off seasons he's been here to a player you're trying to keep at least, that I sit there and I go, I don't get it.
Right.
like, I don't know if there's a contract he's handed out where I sit there and I go, like, specifically, and then see, and I'm saying it that way because you could sit there and say trading for Justin Braun and paying him nearly $4 million is a little bit of a question mark. But what I'm trying to say about that is that he's like, in terms of handing out contracts, there's a reason why the order has gone the way it has. There's a reason why Oscar Lindblom had a deal before the playoffs were over. There's a reason why Nick Aube-Kubel and Robert Hagg are among the first signed of the restricted free agents. I wouldn't be shocked if by early next week, typical Monday, like
6 hours after the show goes up.
6 hours after we launch, that we don't hear something about a contract for Phil Myers, because I think that that's the next step. I had always heard the rumblings about they want to keep Elliott, so prepare yourself for it. And they made sure he didn't even hit the open market, which is a great call, especially when you can get him for less money. I still think Tyler Pitlick's name is going to be on the table.
I hope it is.
I
really like Tyler Pitlick a lot.
And I sort of think that that's as far as you go. Yeah. And that's kind of what I say, like what I was saying when I say you might just run it back this year. You can try to make a trade for, player A or player B, or maybe you make a play in free agency. And there's a couple of guys in free agency that you could sit there and you could take a chance on that are low risk, high reward from a money standpoint, where you take a shot. He might not play in your top 6, but you take the shot anyway, because you say, okay, I can add a couple of guys and feel like I'm making some change here, bringing somebody in who maybe is motivated. Like a guy who I've heard a lot about, who you wonder if he's going to take, we talked about hometown discounts. If Bobby Ryan was going to make $1 million for a year, and then I make the deal.
And he has said, in case any of our listeners have missed the news, he has said that signing with the Flyers is on his priority list this offseason.
Right.
Like, it's high on his priority list.
Right,
Bobby Ryan desperately wants to be a Flyer.
I mean, this is a guy who grew up,
and Cherry Hill native Bobby Ryan, right? We hear it
10 minutes from the skate zone,
right?
Like, come on,
and every time the Flyers play whatever team Bobby Ryan's on, you hear Cherry Hill native Bobby Ryan at least a half a dozen times during the broadcast. It's one of Jim Jackson's favorites.
It's Cherry Hill's Bobby Ryan. It's South Jersey's Johnny Gaudreau. They're getting the band back together, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
but that's a guy who, like, there's no strings attached to it. You know what I'm saying? Like,
I like a Bobby Ryan signing.
He's that low, like, to me, he's one of those low risk, high reward possibilities, because I think that his worst years have been in Ottawa in the sense, and in a lot of ways. I
firmly believe his worst years are behind him.
But like, and I look at shades of what he was in Anaheim, and you hope that maybe there's a lot of positives to him playing close to home. Like, and I'm saying, like, in terms of,
I agree.
You put him back in his hometown city. He's still recovering, obviously, but nonetheless, he's recovering and starting to have so much more of a better grasp
with a good environment, friends and family, being home.
Well, exactly. And I think that was the quote that Bobby Ryan had, which was, it would put me closer to my parents. Like, I'd see my dad more often, and that would be a great thing for me throughout the season, to see him more often. Like, he's right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a handful of others that I'm sure that, you could look into, and that are on that lower range, of deals, because certainly you'd like to see them go out and do the same thing with a defenseman. Find a defenseman who's kind of low risk. I think a guy, one of the names I've seen that's not a bad one to look at is Dylan DeMello, is a guy who's probably a lower contract who you can throw in there.
Yeah,
don't know if he's a top 4.
One more thing on Bobby Ryan, real quick, before we get off it. You talk about being low risk with potentially high reward. Bobby Ryan has scored 30 goals at the NHL level 4 different times.
Right. And I'm not trying,
and that's what I'm saying. We talk about the Anaheim days, and if any of that comes back, right? Because obviously he didn't really do much of that in Ottawa, right? 20, 18, 22, 13, 11, 15. Then this year he had 5. But
5 in what was it?
24 games.
Like 20, he didn't play a lot.
And 3 of them in his first game back. And but if you're getting them for that kind of price, right? And
that's
Bobby Ryan's not going to sign for more than $2 million anywhere in the league, probably at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, if someone's willing to hand him 2 to 2.5, then I have to say hard pass, because
he's
getting more money.
Go
from
take that
else.
money.
But legitimately,
I don't want the Flyers to give it.
And I don't know. Like, Chuck Fletcher kind of dismissed it a little bit. Like, he was kind of dismissive with that answer that he gave about him, like when asked if it was on the radar or something like that. And I don't think that means they're not considering it. I just think that it means that
if a guy comes out in the press and says, "I want to be a Flyer. It's high on my priority list.
then
I
you're
really
calling him.
want to be there."
And like he said, like he said, Fletcher was in Anaheim when
Right.
Bobby Ryan was drafted, and he was drafted second overall. Like,
he's not going to not call him, right? Chuck
Right.
Fletcher is going to call Bobby Ryan at some point, or his agent at some point in the process.
And
I'm sure.
technically, you could call now, right?
I'm not sure what the dates are with the windows open and the blah blah.
No, but he already was bought out. So
he was bought out, wasn't he? Okay, but I'm sure
that's what I'm saying.
Fletcher,
so there's not a free agency window with a buyout. You can just sign him.
I'm sure that Chuck Fletcher is having or will have a conversation with Bobby Ryan's team, whether it's Bobby Ryan himself or his team, about him coming to Philadelphia on that kind of 1 year $1 million deal.
Well, and see, the problem is that Chuck Fletcher is not going to make that call and not try to construct any deal until Phil Meyer signs. Like, you can't think of anything and this is why that's why I said don't be shocked if it's Monday or Tuesday.
Right.
That you find out that Phil Myers is signed to a new deal, because if you're going to retain him, which they are, he's not arbitration eligible. He shouldn't cost you a ton anyway.
Right.
But the bottom line being, you need to know what the cap hit is and then say, what am I going into the offseason?
And then how much you have to play with. Right.
Right. And the draft is really all null and void from that angle, because the draft, you don't spend any money up front.
Right.
You're going to make picks. You're going to try to see what you can get. And maybe you will do trade talk, because picks can move, but you're not going to actually add anything or subtract anything during that time unless you make a trade player for player.
Right.
So that's where, as the week goes on, you're going to have to, from there, try to play it out and see what you have available when Friday hits to say, I feel like we can sign blank. And that's where it goes from there, right? But that's a name that, now that he's been bought out, now that he's available, and now that he is kind of that low risk, high reward. I mean, let's put it this way. Bobby Ryan, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in that piece that we've been talking about, the quotes he's given, said he would take a PTO from a team like that, from like the Flyers, because he wants to say, I'll try out in the area. I don't care. It's a tryout. I'll take a shot.
Right.
I'd love to have them give me a chance. That's what he was saying. I think
Bobby Ryan wants to pull on the orange and black.
Yeah.
That's what he's saying. He wants to wear the sweater. He wants to pull it over his head at least once.
What number is he wearing?
He
can't get that number now.
Just give him 69. Just do it. Just do it. Who says no?
Something with a 9 in it though will work, I think.
I'm sure.
Give him 89. That would be interesting.
Right.
Like, that'd be interesting.
Well, he can't get 19 either. 29 is the next one up the scale, but either way,
something about 29 would look weird for him as a forward.
It would look weird.
It feels like I see 29.
Does
and I think
anybody wear 29 in the NHL at this point?
Usually goalies do, actually. Like, a lot of goalies have worn it.
I feel like Chris Tierney wears 29. Let me look that up real quick while you keep going here. I don't know why, but I think Chris Tierney
I will shift gears then, because we still haven't talked much about the Stanley Cup champions. So okay. I will shift gears to the Stanley Cup champions.
So we do have the Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning.
And I will start by saying
71. Okay.
I will start by saying, obviously, congratulations to the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Absolutely.
Well deserved across the board.
Congratulations, especially to Steven Stamkos.
Yeah, that was cool. And what they did at the end, by the way, when the cup was awarded, to have it wasn't just Stamkos who goes over and gets the trophy. The whole team did the picture around it, like, because it was cool. and they did it that way because of the fact that they had been this family in the bubble for that long, because that was all they had at that time, and they've missed everybody else who couldn't be there. And a handful of families are there, but really that day in Florida when they went back was the day.
Really
the families
cool.
show up at the airport, and here
all
it
the
is.
American families.
Yeah, it was that was really cool. And there's a lot of, there's so many guys on this team that are deserving. I watched before we got on and last week and talked about it. I'd watched Game 4 with a few friends. And we were kind of spreading back and forth, like, guys who we would feel good about. And like Stamkos comes up, obviously. And I said this last week on the show, I think Hedman's the best defenseman in the NHL right now. And
I think he's got a case for sure. Yeah.
And Andrei Vasilevsky to me is the best goalie in the NHL right now. And ironically didn't have a shutout until the final game of the whole thing, where he wins.
Locked it down when he needed it, too.
And I don't think it was as challenging of a shutout. He made a few impressive saves, but it wasn't as challenging of a shutout.
That was a smothering defensive
They
game.
played so well.
Tampa,
that was a team on a mission. I feel really good for John Cooper, because I think that John Cooper's one of the – and here's the thing. Like, I had this thought about Tampa Bay as I was thinking about what to say on this week's show with them. And one of the things I want to talk about with them, Hedman included in this discussion, because I wrote down Hedman specifically because he won the Conn Smythe. Very deserving, by the way. I believe he was my favorite for the team going into the series.
He won by one first place vote.
Really? Where did you see that information?
I heard it on Spit and Chicklets. Do not.
Then that's a guy who was privy to the information.
Right.
Okay.
Apparently, Hedman had 9 first place votes, 8 second place votes, and 1 third place vote. Braden Point had 8 first place votes, 8 second place votes, and 1 third place vote.
Wow.
It was exactly one.
So who had the other vote then?
I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Or was that it? Like, were they
might have been Vasilevsky. It might have been, I don't know.
I can't see it being Vasilevsky for the entire playoffs though. Like, I don't feel like he had as much involvement sometimes, like in a weird sort of way.
You think a guy like Cirelli maybe?
Cirelli's an interesting one. Kucherov's a good choice. Palat probably had a bit of a case.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Conn Smythe is like it's only going to be from the winning team because obviously, the last person from the losing team was Ron Hextall.
No.
I'm sorry. It was JSG. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But either way, it's very unlikely that it's going to be from another team.
Yeah, it takes a spectacular effort too.
Right. So at a certain point, if you win a cup, everybody contributed.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So once you win, you probably have 3 or 4 guys with a legitimate case to at least get some votes. But either way, apparently it was very close. Victor Hedman definitely deserved it, but
no. And in fairness, I came out of. I almost said it last week. I don't think I said it on the show, but it was in my head at the time. If we were going to talk about it, Hedman was my pick going into the series. Like before the Stanley Cup final started, I said, "Who's been the most valuable player for Tampa so far in the playoffs?" It's Victor Hedman.
Yep.
And as the final got through Game 5, and ironically enough, of course, who scored the game-winning goal? The only goal that mattered. Like there was 2 goals in the game, obviously, but the only goal that mattered, that was needed, was Braden Point's goal.
Yep.
And I started to tell myself,
and I think that's why he got that last minute run.
I started to tell myself after games 4 and 5, I wonder if this is Braden Point's to lose now because he's scoring almost every game. And he missed time in the playoffs.
Really lit it up.
And he missed time in the playoffs, which is really interesting. You know what I mean? Like there was
the
so
fact
much
that he was
of that.
in this running with games missing.
Right. And scoring as much as he did too. I mean, what he finished with 14 goals was what his total was.
It's something absurd.
It's like it was absurd.
And also, by the way, he's 24.
I stand by my
statement.
I stand by my statement last week. He's a top 10 forward in this league.
I don't think that's unreasonable.
And he is
in 23 playoff games.
Actually, at this point in time, I said forward there because I think he might be a top 10 player in this league. Okay. And he said, and a top 5 forward in the league.
In 23 playoff games, Braden Point had 14 goals and 33 points total.
And didn't win the Conn Smythe.
No, 14 goals.
And yet it was totally understandable that he didn't win the Conn Smythe.
And no one's upset about it.
Argued it. Yeah, right. Because Victor Hedman played 57 minutes the game after he left with an ankle problem.
Yeah.
And it was, that was such an effort. And I mean, it's funny to me because Braden Point had the game-winning goal in that game, in that series. In the Stanley Cup final, he had that game winner too. Like there's so many times where he contributed. Like I said, Point's got the clutch gene. He knows how to do it in crucial situations and in the biggest games. Does he step up. And so let me shift gears then to where I was going because I always write. I told you this. I always write something after the whole thing is over. And I knew already that if it was Tampa Bay.
Sorry, and where can that be found, Kevin?
97.3 ESPN, Sports Talk Philly.
Oh, okay.
The drill. Yeah. So
we'll do the plugs at the end of the show, and I had to get that in there.
And I kind of teased it last week because I said, if Tampa wins, then it's easy to figure out what to talk about. It's the need to draft it, to draft everybody. Yep. And I got to go back and pull it up really quickly to read off the list because we were starting to throw it around in the group chat, and I obviously had to do some digging on it and talk about everybody who was a pick.
Everybody who's a homegrown member of the Tampa Bay Lightning.
And I started it with some of the obvious ones because I said Stamkos was a top pick. He was number 1 in 2008.
Yep.
No problem. You get a guy like that, you go and get the best guy. You're supposed to get a talented player.
Ivan Provorov. Right.
Victor Hedman was a second in 2009. Okay, same thing. You expect big things from him because he's a top 3 pick, right?
Yeah.
The fact that you took Andrei Vasilevsky even in the first round is significant because goalies don't typically go in the first round. He's a 19th overall pick. That's huge. that makes no sense. And then you start to get to,
and by the way,
fines.
his brand new contract starts next year as Andrei Vasilevsky. His brand new $9.5 million a year contract kicks in next year, whenever that starts.
And he'll be worth every penny of it because he's that
they
good.
don't care right now because they just won the cup. But boy,
Exactly.
they are not in the best cap situation.
So you get through. So that's only 3 players. It's one player at every most important position on the ice. You have the goalie, you have the defenseman, you have the top forward.
The center, right.
But then you start to fill in the rest of the lineup, and you start to draft these other players, and you start to realize that every single one of these guys is a find that every team in the league passed on once at minimum. You sit there and so actually I found
second round pick, 58 overall.
Correct. That's the second name I have on the list, and I'll tell you why. I kind of went in order.
Okay.
So I didn't even realize this because I think we all kind of associate the guy who's been there and had to go through this the longest is Stamkos, right?
Right.
Alex Kalorum was a 2007 draft pick a year before Stamkos.
Wow, was he really?
Now, doesn't mean he was playing in the league at that time. I think he was still
pick, 77th
developing.
overall.
Yeah, he was 77th overall. Then you have Kucherov, 58th overall in the 11 draft.
Yep.
Same draft, 7th round, Andre Palat.
That's a good one.
Right.
That's a good one.
Cedric Paquette in 2012 was a 4th-round pick. Braden Point in 14, 3rd-round pick. Cirelli's a 3rd-rounder in 15. Yep. Johnson and Yanni Gourde, not even drafted. They were undrafted free agents signed by this team. And you get all of these guys. And then I tapped into interesting trades that you make when you have that kind of flexibility, when you've drafted that well, and you draft so well that you're trading draft picks.
Right.
Jonathan Drouin gets traded so you can get a defenseman in Mikhail Sergachev.
Who they have to re-sign this summer.
You trade – yeah, that's true, but I think they find a way because they really like him.
Sure. Yeah. We can touch on their cap stuff after we talk about this.
I don't really need to. I want to get we got draft stuff to talk about after
that's
this
fair.
too. So you trade away 2 former first-round picks and a former second-round pick, Brett Howden, Vlad Namestnikov, Libor Hayek. And you trade him to the Rangers to get a guy like Ryan McDonough. And at the time, they got JT Miller in the package, and Miller is now in Vancouver. But McDonough, huge part of this team, right?
Yep. You
make deals at the deadline this year that get you Blake Coleman and Barclay Goodrow. You go through the process, and this is the most interesting one to me. You go through the free agency process, and you don't jump at stuff on day one, per se. You kind of wait it out. And in August, a month before training camp starts, if that, Patrick Maroon is still a free agent. And Kevin Shattenkirk is still a free agent.
Patrick Maroon, back-to-back Stanley Cup champion.
Yeah. And somehow or other, this is another interesting one. In February, you add Zach Bogosian through a signing.
Yep.
Because he's just available.
Because he's just floating.
And that's how you build a team like that.
That's how you win a Stanley Cup, folks.
Right, and then the other key thing that I also touched on in that article, and it was a great quote. I didn't write the full quote because I didn't go that deep into it, but John Cooper had an excellent quote about about failure and the need to go through it to come back and to get to that point. You don't just I think his point being you don't just get there on your first shot.
Right.
And I think it's such an important
message. This team knows it better than most others.
Sure.
This Tampa
Bay
Bay
I think
squad.
It's such an important message from a Flyer standpoint because this is how I like to tie it all back in. The first thing is that, well, for a few years now, the draft has been the most important weekend for the Flyers. It's been who can you get that you know is going to be part of your future. And it doesn't always take, like, it might be one guy a year. And that means it takes 6 or 7 years. But there's a team right now that I just mentioned, 7 different draft years over the course of 12 to get there. Right. And somebody from that team plays a role on that, and that's how it works sometimes. The failure thing is really what stands out to me, though, because this is as far as the Flyers have gotten in the playoffs
in a long time. Yeah.
Since the Cup run.
Right.
I mean, even in 2012, they win a series, but that second round series is over in 5 games.
Right. You didn't go to game 7.
This is as far as they've gotten since the Cup run. And as a result of that, it feels like it's awful that they don't make it past that. And it was definitely unique circumstances to do it. But it's only the first year of all of these guys. You need to go through it. And this is a team that's been told, Tampa I'm talking about now, this is a team that's been told, you're it. For 5 years, they've been told, you're the one.
You're the team.
You're going to be it. It's your time.
How many times have they won the President's Trophy, right? At least a couple.
2015, you make that final run, and what happens? You hit dynasty.
Yeah.
You know, the last dynasty we can think of, you hit the dynasty.
Maybe the last dynasty ever.
Depending on how things go in the future,
right.
Sure. You know, but you
well
hit
before
dynasty.
The Flyers win 4 cups in 6 years, but
but you do. You hit dynasty that year. Then you come back the next year, and there's several years in there. I mean, there's one where they missed the playoffs, but they had a couple where
that year was horrible. They had awful injuries and still almost made it.
Right. So that was 2015. They go to the Cup final. 2016, they got to within a game of going to the Stanley Cup final again.
Yep.
They're up 3-2 after Game 5, and they lose back-to-back games to Pittsburgh. They're out. They don't make it past there. They missed the playoffs in 17 because of injuries. Stamkos played like 20 games that year or something like that. I don't have that number from me, but the number I wrote down in the article. It might have been. Yeah.
I think that was the year he broke his leg. Yeah.
It might have been. And not only that, but I wrote down that in addition to Stamkos not playing much, the Lightning had 5 forwards that year who played 70 or more games. Like, that's it.
Oof.
When you only have 5 regulars who play,
it's tough to do that.
Right, who play 70 games, that's
and
tough.
when one of them isn't your captain, right? When your captain's out all year.
But I will tell you right now, like, even Braden Point, 68 games. And it was a while ago, don't get me wrong, but nonetheless. And then 2018, literally a repeat of 16. You get through the first 2 rounds, you get a win in Game 5 of the conference finals to take a 3-2 lead. You're there. You're going to go back to the Stanley Cup final. And then Washington won back-to-back games. And, oh, by the way, not only did Washington win back-to-back games, Tampa Bay didn't score a goal after Game 5. It was over.
And that's kind of where you started hearing the they can't win it whispers. That's when it's really starting to kind of become a thing that Steven Stamkos can't win, or that the Tampa Bay Lightning can't win, or that blah, blah, blah. Right. And then they turn around and put up maybe the best season by any team since the lockout.
Correct. Then came that
maybe
year.
The most dominant season any team has ever had since the lockout.
Right. And
then they go into the first round of the playoffs. They're up 3-0 over Columbus in Game 1. And you get swept. You lose that series. You just completely crumble.
And do not think for a second that wasn't on their minds the entire time during this run, not only during the playoffs and other situations as they were going through the playoff run, but from the first round series against Columbus again.
Yep.
You got to play Columbus right away.
And I'm sure they would have it no other way.
Throughout.
I'm sure Tampa loved that they got matched up with Columbus because they know if they're going to climb this mountain, they got to do it the right way. They have to avenge last year.
But another good thing from John Cooper in that end of the game after the cup winning game, press conference, about the 5 overtime game, because he even said, "We lose that game, I bet you it's a different series. We're probably not sitting.
They might lose that series."
Game. And he even said because that was you noticed that it was that's how meaningful that win was going to be.
Yep. And they won that game, and then I believe Columbus ended up winning Game 2, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Columbus came back and bounced back and won Game 2, but they faded down the stretch. And Tampa played like a team that deserved to win a championship, if that makes sense. Like okay. The Dallas Stars did not lose this Stanley Cup. The Tampa Bay Lightning won this Stanley Cup. Right. They went out there and took it. It was not given to them. They did not luck into it. They didn't fall backwards into it. They grabbed it by the neck and said, "We're taking you home. It didn't work last year, but we're taking you home. We have to."
Well, and that's the line I wrote in the article was that series, and I don't know the series because I just described the whole thing and everything, but I went, that's the one. That's the bitter defeat that stayed with this team throughout the year, and it's the one that made them say, never again. We're not going to be defined by another series loss. We're going to go and actually take this thing. And
they did.
They did it with the same group. That's another thing too. They did it with a group that a lot of people thought after last year and the way that they exited quickly, it's time to blow it all up and change it around. They didn't do that.
There was talk about Sergachev getting traded. There was talk about all sorts of stuff.
And even this, for a comparison, to connect it to the Flyers also. Who built the team?
Steve Yzerman.
Yeah. And Steve Yzerman's not there to get the glory of it. But
there's a lot of similarities, and I don't know if the Flyers are as talented as the Tampa Bay Lightning yet. But if Claude Giroux can pull a little Steven Stamkos magic, and Ivan Provorov can pull a little Victor Hedman magic, and Carter Hart can pull a little Andrei Vasilevsky magic.
Well, one of the things I wrote at the end of it, too, is I even said, if the NHL really is a copycat league, the Flyers don't have a lot to copy.
The Flyers have already done it, right?
The blueprint was already established.
I don't know if you've listened to the latest Dangle podcast, but they were talking about it a little bit. The latest Steve Dangle podcast, they mentioned early on in the show that it's a copycat league. When the Bruins won last year, or when the Blues won last year, everybody wanted to get big and tough and blah, blah, blah. What are you going to copy off of this year's Tampa Bay Lightning? Building a great team perfectly?
Well, for one.
Like, how do you copy that? If everyone could copy that, we'd have 31 Tampa Bay Lightnings. You know what I mean? Like, teams have been trying to copy Tampa for years.
I think people have been trying to copy Tampa since 2015.
That's what I'm saying. And the only way to do that is by doing all these things we talk about, right? Drafting well, locking those players up long term, like building a good team. These are all the things.
And to an extent, I hate the copycat league term to an extent, because here's the thing. No team wins a Stanley Cup without an element of luck. And I'm not saying that doesn't mean you're the best team. Tampa was the best team in the league.
I think Tampa might have had the lower, like one of the lower luck percentages of recent Stanley Cup winners.
But it's bounces too. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain things that have to happen in a game. Like, let's put it this way. I don't know if Tampa, let's put it, there's a lot of opportunities for something to go wrong in that 5 overtime game.
Right.
They're in game 4 and they are 2 minutes away from losing that game and having to go to a game 5 that's going to continue the series. And it's going to be, and all that's actually, I'm sorry, I got that a little mixed up. It's game 5. So they're two minutes away from it going to game 6.
They're forcing a game 6, right?
Yeah. And you're just thinking that thought's going to creep back into their heads, like, here they come and it's not over yet.
Here's the choke job.
And well, not only that, but it's one of those, it's not over yet. It's going to take another game, and you've already played a 5 overtime game, and they get that just that goal that looks like it almost shouldn't even go in. You get the right bounce off of a skate. It goes through the legs of a goalie and it goes into the net.
Yep. And
I think it's so much so that it's an Eddie Olczyk line that I will use at this one. It doesn't even hit the back of the net.
No, it didn't.
And it's that simple. And you get it. You kind of get a gift in the overtime too, where Point wins at that time, because it literally is a giveaway that just leaves him wide open in front of the net. I mean, he's all alone. So you don't want to leave a guy like that wide open. So
no.
Obviously he's going to be a talent. He's going to be such a talented player going forward. But that's what I'm saying. Like, I think that every team that wins a Stanley Cup has an element of luck to it at some point in time. And maybe there's teams that don't have as much luck as others do because they're that talented. But there's always a factor that changes the way a team should have been built, or how you decided to build it, or whatever the case may be. And I say that meaning, just because St. Louis won it by being big and tough and having some size,
thrown body,
doesn't mean that every team goes out there and then, if you get bigger and tougher and have more size, then you're going to win a Stanley Cup. You still got to catch some of the breaks. And St. Louis sure caught a lot of them because of the fact that, like, this way, that should have been 2-0 Boston after the first period of Game 7 the year before, and not the other way around. And it was 2-0 St. Louis, and they were sailing away and getting ready to go because they had the 2 goals on 4 shots that Boston, didn't have. And that's what helps them win. This was a testament to building it the right way. This was LA Kings worthy, the way the Kings built their teams, kind of the way Chicago built their teams, because Chicago did build a lot of it through finding guys and bringing them through the system. It's the way that it really has to be done. And it's encouraging that that's how they did it, because it just shows that that's still the right method. And it kind of validates Ron Hextall a little bit.
Oh yeah. I think Ron Hextall has been completely validated by both the Flyers performance and then now by this Tampa Stanley Cup.
Ron Hextall's validated on Carter Hart alone almost.
I agree.
You find a goalie like that, it validates everything you did to get him.
You talk about this Tampa team and guys that have been passed over. Every team in the league passed over Carter Hart.
Well, it's really funny too, because it's not like they traded it, like they didn't trade up to get him or anything like that.
Right.
They just had that
They
pick.
just picked them.
And it's really funny because what I'm saying when I say it's funny is every year, like, I'm going to tell everybody right now as we start to shift toward draft talk.
Yeah.
The Flyers will probably take a goalie this year, and it doesn't mean anything.
Probably.
The point is that I think Brett Flair said you take a goalie every year just to see what hits because you never know which guy it's going to be.
It's amazing. One of my favorite things about hockey and talking about hockey and analyzing hockey and paying attention to hockey is that 90% of the community looks at goalies and goes, yeah, I don't know. One of my favorite things about hockey is that when you're talking about analyzing hockey, watching hockey, blah, 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 90% of your experts, right? They're breaking down forwards, they're breaking down defensemen, they're breaking down scoring plays and passes and blah, blah, blah. And then you ask them about this goalie and why this goalie is so good. And they go, he's just good. I don't know. Goalies are great. Because the goaltending thing is such a mystery. And goaltending is just such it's so different than anything in the game.
It makes you appreciate Brian Boucher on the broadcast because here's a guy who played the position who's able to explain it to you. I definitely feel that.
Yeah, and it's just crazy to me that goalies are almost playing a different game, right? Like
for sure.
You hire different scouts to scout goalies. You hire different coaches to coach goalies. Like they're off doing their own thing. They're all insane. They're all wandering around the woods and humongous big. And like that's just the goaltending world, right? And it's funny. So you're right. You have to take a goalie every year because
you kind of do.
Every year you draw a card off the deck. Sometimes it's the 4 of spades, but sometimes it's the ace of spades, right?
I find it really interesting too because this year in particular, there's a goalie out there who's going to go in the first round.
Yeah, the Russian guy. Yeah.
Yes.
There's talk that he's going I've heard as high as 4 to Detroit.
Well, yeah, I've heard some pretty crazy things.
I don't think it's going to happen, but I've heard that he could go as high as number 4 to Detroit.
Yeah, Yaroslav Askarov is the goalie, and he's going to be the oddball of the group in the first round because he's the goalie who's going to go somewhere in this picture. You're going to have a ton of maybe not a ton of defensemen, but you're going to have forwards and wingers going left and right here, and then defensemen being thrown into the mix. And then there's one goalie who's, standing out in this thing.
He will not fall past 13. If he is still there at 13, the Carolina Hurricanes will take him. I'd be willing to bet a large sum of money.
I believe that.
I'd be willing to bet a large sum of money because this guy's coming over and there's talk about him contributing quickly, kind of in a Carter Hart type timeline. And even Carter Hart went back to juniors, twice? At least once?
Yeah. He went twice.
Okay.
So that second year he was dominant at juniors. Right. I think both times he went back.
All 3 years. He won CHL goalie of the year 2 times in a row, WHL goalie of the year 3 times in a row.
Right. I think his draft year he only was WHL goalie of the year, and it was after that he was CHL twice.
His 2 post-draft years he won CHL goalie of the year.
Well, because the 2 post-draft years were also both of the years he was in World Juniors. The one was only come away with a silver and a gold. Not too bad.
But yeah, you're right. You have to take a goalie every year because right now we're looking at the Flyer system, right? And we have Alex Lyon, who also signed a 1-year deal to remain probably a Phantom. Let's be real.
A Phantom / Black Ace, because he's going to be around
exactly. Alex Lyon. I'm going to make a 20-year-old reference. Alex Lyon is a phenomenal Neil Little.
That's not a bad comparison, though. And he's
a great AHL goalie. He's a great AHL goalie. He can bounce around as an NHL backup if you need him to. He can come and start you a couple of games at the NHL level, and you're not devastated if Alex Lyon's starting for you.
He embraces that role though too, which is why it's such a good comparison because Neil Little kind of knew what he was.
Yep. You talked earlier about Brian
Elliott. Comparison.
We talked earlier about Henrik Lundqvist's new role and Brian Elliott kind of knowing his role as a backup here in Philly and really liking that role. Alex Lyon is another guy who has accepted his role with arms wide open. He loves. I really honestly believe that Alex Lyon loves being in the Philadelphia Flyer system and loves being.
Oh yeah, I think so too.
He was the guy doing the blogs in the bubble, right? He was the guy. Walking around
trying to comment on ping pong matches and things like that. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
It was
telling about how you can see the Pacific Ocean from his window.
Right. I could see, and obviously I don't know this is going to happen, but I could see Alex Lyon being a Phantom as long as he wants to be, and then just stepping directly into the team's front office. I feel like he loves to be here. And okay, but we're talking about goalies in the system, right? We got Carter Hart, we got Brian Elliott, we got Alex Lyon. After that, we kind of get down to the prospects, right?
Right, and there's 3.
There's Felix Sandstrom, Kirill Ostamenko, and
Samuel
Ursin.
Ursin.
Samuel Ursin is the third one. Are any of those guys future NHL starters? Maybe.
Too soon to say, but
right, maybe.
I think if you ask me who the next best one is, it's going to be, I think Ursin's the next best one.
I like what I've seen out of Ostamenko, and I haven't seen much out of Ursin yet.
Ursin's very much still a young kid who's over in Sweden. I don't even know I think he's just playing pro fairly recently.
Okay.
Like I don't think they got him so young anyway, so it's not like he's gonna. It's not like you're gonna hear a lot about him for a while.
That's the thing about goalies. It's crazy. You draft them at 18, and then you stick them in a time capsule and say, "Hey, come back when you're 24."
Kind of, but at the same time,
especially these European goalies.
Yeah,
a lot of times when they're playing in the.
But at the same time, I will say every time I feel like I see an update on it, he has a really good game. He's probably the most consistent of the prospects. That's where I think I'm going with it.
Well, that's good.
Sandstrom doesn't get in. Sandstrom's going to get it. Like it sucks for Sandstrom too, because Sandstrom was probably going to be the Phantom starter next year.
Yeah.
And we don't even know what next year is. Like
we don't know if the Phantoms are going to play next year.
Exactly, but he was probably going to be the starter. And Ostamenko was not far behind. Like you could have honestly seen that they were going to rotate 3 in again.
Yeah, I agree.
And done something like that. To be honest.
And the nice thing is in the AHL, that's pretty easy because you're playing 3 games in 3 nights, and you're going to just say, "All right, you start Friday, you start Saturday, you start Sunday, and here you go."
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame for those guys because I think I'd like to have seen it just to see more of them. Because Sandstrom's had some moments. I think he has. He definitely has a lot of potential.
Definitely.
And
all 3 of these kind of prospect goalies we're talking about definitely have potential, right?
Right.
Sandstrom's has been a high level prospect kind of his whole time. Same with Ostamenko, and then like you said, Ursin's over in Europe, and all 3 of these guys were drafted for a reason. All 3 of these guys have potential.
Right. Now,
I'm sure the Flyers have rights on other guys too, but they're not the guys we're talking about.
Right, and I mean. Well, they took a couple goalies last year. I think Roddy Ross is one of them who comes to mind. I know they added 1 right there. So there's more than 6 in the system. It's just those are the 6 we're going to talk about.
The nice thing is because there's only 2 goalies on your roster, you have 3 in your system and you're in phenomenal shape.
Right. Now we had talked about, or to get into the draft a little bit, because we started to look at it beforehand. Yeah. So they have 7 total picks in this draft, I believe. Yep. And
the Flyers are missing their 2023rd, but they do have an extra 7th round pick from the Montreal Canadiens.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, by the way, that 3rd round pick that for this year that's gone was part of the Justin Braun trade. So that's where that went.
Okay. And you can't really
if anybody's interested in knowing that. And
it was the 7th round Nate Schmidt, or not Nate Schmidt. I'm sorry. Who was the 7th round from Montreal? Was that the Dale Weiss deal?
The 7th rounder from Montreal. No, hold on a minute. Let me see where this is coming from. No, this was just straight up a 7th for a 7th, which the Flyers have done with Montreal for like 3 years in a row at least.
So strange.
It's like the draft day tradition.
I wonder if Mark Bergevin has a bet with the head of Comcast, and they went and played a round of golf, and then they have to trade each other 7ths based on who wins.
Like it's really funny to me too, because like I look at this for a minute and I sit there and like every time, because I believe the one time I think Montreal traded up in the 7th round, or traded that like, oh, we'll swap picks alternate years or whatever.
Okay.
To get Caden Primo.
Wow. That's probably going to be a very, very, very good draft pick.
Yeah.
It certainly looks like it might be.
But otherwise, I mean, the Flyers have, at that point in time, then they have 6 picks on day 2 outside of the 1st round pick that they have. It's a good number. You're not going to go crazy trying to add something like to that list. I think you're just going to try to probably make those 6. And if not, 2 of them being in the 7th round, you might see one of those types of trades again where they go, okay, well, you know what? We'll just trade the pick and get another one for next year.
I think this might be the last year you see the Flyers have this many picks. I think as we move forward, the way this team is built and where this team is going, I think for the next couple of years here, you're more likely to see Chuck Fletcher trade a pick at the deadline for a rental type guy, right? The Flyers are getting into that the window is open mode.
The window is open for it. Here's what I will say about that. I wouldn't sacrifice your 1st or 2nd round picks easily.
I agree.
That's
absolutely
the thing.
But if a deal comes around, I'm starting to get to the point where I'm okay with it.
Right. And I mean, the Flyers have second-round picks throughout, I believe, because I believe one of the picks they traded, because I know they traded a second-round pick in the Braun deal, but I believe that was a pick that wasn't originally theirs anyway.
Okay.
So that's why it still stands. Like, they have their own first and their own second for each of the next 3 years right now. They don't have a third this year, but they do have it for the following 2 years. I think the only pick that they've given up so far in the next 2 seasons following this draft is the 5th-round pick that they used to get Thompson.
Okay.
And that's it.
Yeah,
and
that's
next year.
So, yeah.
But, all right, so you don't have a third this year. Let's kind of get into some of these prospects. And
we're not going to go much past the first round because we
focus a lot on the first round. I mean,
once you get to the second round, there's so much dependent on who's still there, right? Like by the time the Flyers pick the second time, 50 plus guys will have gone.
Right. And you're just going to kind of look at where, like, so here's what I did to kind of break it down.
Based on who's left.
Right. And here's what I kind of did to break it down to make it easy for people to an extent, and definitely make it easier for me because I feel like it helps to sort out what people think is the strongest. So I refer to a number of draft guides every year, and I have 4 of them this year.
Okay.
Three of them that I've used regularly, and I think one that I added this year to kind of replace something else or whatever. So hockeyprospect.com puts out their black book every year, which is outstanding. Has so many different pieces of information into it. It's
if there's one source you look at for our
this is probably the one, and it's well worth the money if you want to get really detailed into it.
Yeah.
Future considerations. Recruits puts out a good guide, and McKean's puts out a good guide.
Okay.
So I've looked at all of those, and this is what I did when I put all these things into it, because I made a little spreadsheet with it.
I will also, while we're mentioning sources here, I will also shout out The Athletic and Corey Pronman because he does a great job with prospects.
He did a full 7-round mock.
He did a 7-round 200 and whatever pick
17
mock.
I think, or something like that. Yeah.
But just while we're shouting out sources, I did also want to throw The Athletic.
And I have that pulled up too, by the way, just so we can tap into it. But those are the 4 that I did. And what I did is I go by their ranking system, like whatever they ranked all the players as. And I just basically went through by position. I said, okay, centers, wingers, and defensemen. How long will it take for me? Like, how many of players at each position will I go through by the time I get to 50?
Okay.
What on your top 50 list? And there's a very clear-cut answer as to what positions are the strongest. So here's the number of centers by each guide, okay?
Okay. And we're talking first round only, right?
No, we're talking top 50.
Oh, top 50. I'm sorry.
So Hockey Prospect had, by their estimation, 15 centers in the top 50. Okay. The last one coming at 41st.
Okay.
Both Future Considerations and McKean's had 19 centers in the top 50.
Yep.
One Future Considerations, their lowest was 49. McKean's was 48. And by the way, I will spoil this and say it's the same player. I'll mention his name later. Recruits had 16, and 50 was the low mark. And then you go over for wingers. Wingers was very interesting. Hockey Prospect has 21 wingers in the top 50.
Wow.
Future Considerations has 16. McKean's had 20, and Recruits had 18. And then you go to defensemen, and when I go through 50, Hockey Prospect, Future Considerations, and Recruits each had 14, and McKean's only had 10 in the top 50.
Yep.
And only 7 of the 10 were in the top 40.
Okay.
So it's not a defensive-heavy draft. Like, I pulled most of those defensemen out of the 40s. I will tell you that now. So
a lot of those guys are going to
forward
near the top of the board when the Flyers are coming up. Or
right now, granted, unlike what I did with some of the other things, because over the last couple of days leading up to this, and the last piece went up right before we started recording today, which was I do lists of prospects at different positions. So I did a centers piece, I did a wingers piece, and I did a defenseman piece. And when I do those, unlike the chart that I have in front of me, where I listed every prospect on the list in the top 50, with the exception of the one goalie, by the way.
Right.
So I have 49 names written down. I did not in the other pieces, because I'm trying to focus on it from a Flyer standpoint, I did not list the obvious names that are not going to go to the Flyers.
Right.
So you're not going to find Lafreniere.
Alexis Lafreniere?
No, you're not going to find Alexis Lafreniere, and you're not going to find Tim Stützle, and you're not going to find a couple others in there. Lucas Raymond I didn't put in there. I'm looking at wingers specifically. That's why I'm skipping a couple.
Before we start talking about who the Flyers might actually get to take at 23, do you think the Flyers stay at 23? And if not, do you think they're more likely to move up or move down?
I think they will stay at 23 because I think that there's a need to do something with that pick.
Okay.
And if they're going to do anything, they'll move down because then they'll think that someone's there, like who's there is going to be there. They've pretty much explained that it's a good top 25 draft.
Okay.
So there's no question about it. At 23, they will get somebody who's got some good potential.
They consider good, right?
The key is if anybody else rises up and you can sit there and say out of the 25, now 5 of them are still there at 23, which means that we could move down to 29 and still get one.
And still be good, right?
You know what I mean? Like, and maybe by doing that, you add back a third to do it. Like,
I don't hate something like that.
Like, we'll trade 23 for 28 and 75 or something like, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm throwing out numbers at random. I'm not being specific, but
right. I think Detroit has a pick in the late 20s that they might be interested in moving.
Right. You try to figure out if there's a team out there who wants to get a little aggressive and move up. And
honestly,
if you can get the guy.
I think Detroit at I know they have a pick in the late first. Detroit, do they not? I thought they did. I'm sorry, Ottawa.
Yes.
Ottawa has 28. I think they're a real candidate to try to trade up to 23 if there's somebody that they like there, right? That's a team that's still trying to fill out a whole roster.
But nonetheless, I think that they are like it's either going to be down or stay put. I don't think there's moving up because I think it's going to cost too much.
And if they're trading down, they're only slipping down a little bit.
The only way they're going to trade up is if you can actually trade up somehow while shedding cap space, which is I think next to impossible. Then you got to get back a significantly lesser player.
I'm not saying they should, but they could do something like, let's say, Jake Voracek and 23 for 13 or whatever. But it's not likely. I don't think it's going to happen. But theoretically, it's possible.
All right. So are we looking at now? You want me to look at or tell you some of the names?
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's get to it then.
Okay. Let's start with the single player you would like the Flyers to take the most.
Okay. So it's an exclusive for the listeners then, because normally I save this for the morning of the draft.
Well, listen, if you want to save it for the morning of the draft, that's up to you.
No. I save it for the morning of the draft in writing. I can say it on here. I'm fine with that because let's put it this way. I do every year. I do a targets piece on the day of the draft, and I say
you're Chuck Fletcher, and this guy is available at 23. Who are you taking?
I do a targets piece, and every year when I do this, I basically do a list of 5.
Okay.
So I will give you my list of this. My list this time is of 7 because I included multiple. It's a good draft at that time, and I also included multiple names that there's a lot of flexibility here because there's a lot of questions about who's going to go where, probably from about 8 or 9 down.
8 or 9 to like 16
to 31.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I mean, to be quite honest with you, after I started to notice a significant drop off after guys who were projected first rounders. Like the guys projected second round, you're getting a project,
right?
Just so you know right off the bat. But for just comparison's sake, I want to run down something else before I get to this year's targets, which is over the years I've done this, I've written down names, and just so people know how well either some of those names have performed that I thought would be there when the Flyers picked, or how close I've gotten to guessing right.
Okay.
So the first year I really did this was 14. I did not have Travis Sanheim written down anywhere. That was kind of an out of the blue pick. But I did have Kasperi Kapanen down. I had William Nylander down. I had Alex Tuck, Dylan Larkin. Anthony DeAngelo was picked around that time. Hayden Fleury was a pick. Thatcher Demko I even had as a goalie.
That was a good draft.
It was a good draft. And that was before – you got to remember, I put Thatcher Demko down because that was before Carter Hart. That was 2 years before Carter Hart, so that was still trying to find the goalie.
And Thatcher Demko still hasn't really broken in.
He's just starting to now.
Right.
Right.
I think they played a similar number of games this year, so it's just interesting how that works.
I think if Thatcher Demko was in a different situation than going to Vancouver,
he would. Yeah.
Well, and at the time they still had Schneider and probably Luongo at the time.
They probably still had Luongo. Yeah.
When they drafted him, sure. So 15
was one of the reasons they justified trading away Luongo was that they had Demko in the pipeline.
So 15 was an interesting year because 15 they had 2 first-round picks.
Okay.
I only focused on 7. I didn't focus on, at the time, 29, and then they traded up to 24 to get Konechny. Mitch Marner was the first name on my list, and I wrote it down knowing he probably wasn't going to make it outside the top 5. The second name on my list was Ivan Provorov.
There you go.
So there you go. I mean, among others, though, just so
worked out pretty well.
No, just so people know how I was feeling about other prospects in there. I put Pavel Zacha down because I knew there was a connection. The Flyers were talked about him. He hasn't really panned out as much, but the others, Mikko
You know what?
Rantanen.
I still think Pavel Zacha's a really good player. I don't think he's shown it at the NHL level yet, but I think he's
I don't think
going
he's
to
in a
be a
good.
solid contributor.
I don't think he's in a good place.
Right. I mean, he might not live up to that top 10, you know,
But I don't think he's. I don't think he's in a good.
a very good player.
I don't think he's on a good team to try to do it though. That's the problem. Like I feel like they've
Definitely
already kind of made up their minds about what they think he is.
Yeah.
Mikko Rantanen was also on my list, which obviously, I mean, Rantanen's
Is that
a
a good
stud.
one?
Yeah, gee, is that good?
Is that a good pick?
I had Lawson Krause down, who has been decent for Arizona. He's had some good recent years.
Again, not necessarily the best situation the last couple, not the best team.
No, but I think he's starting to take steps like because they've gotten better, he's gotten better. And then here's one I threw down as an honorable mention, and I went, oh, this is a guy upon reading about him, I like him. Timo Meyer. Okay. In his draft year, I sat there, I'm like, oh, I like what I'm reading about this kid, and he's really good.
Yeah.
Now,
Timo Meyer is a very good hockey player.
16 was an interesting year, by the way, because they traded down that year.
Right.
I want to go pull this up really quick because just so people have an understanding of how I kind of thought at the time, because they were supposed to pick 18th, I believe.
Okay.
And so I did it around the 18th pick. So the 18th pick, they traded with Winnipeg, I believe it says. Yes. And Winnipeg drafted Logan Stanley, a defenseman. My list that year was Max Jones, Julian Gauthier, Kiefer Bellows, and then Yerman Rubtsov. So he's fourth on my list. They did pick him as the fourth guy on my list. Gauthier went 21, Bellows went 19, and Jones went 24. So I kind of was in the ballpark.
Right.
You know, with that's who's going to be there. And
notable misses from the Flyers, by the way. Toward the end of the first round, God, it's really not a great first round. The Flyers didn't miss on a ton on German
16.
Rubtsov.
No, not really. I mean, trading down was a little bit of an interesting choice because I think Bellows would have been a great pick for them.
Your biggest miss in the first round is probably Sam Steele at this point, but even then,
but Gauthier and Bellows are getting. Gauthier and Bellows are getting there, and that's the thing.
Agree.
Like they're going to be. Yeah. They're going to be pretty darn good. I mean, I think the other name I wrote down, by the way, from that draft, if they wanted to go defenseman, was that I liked Jake Bean, but he went way ahead of where they would have picked. He went 13. Yeah. So that was a little different. Okay, so
Charlie McAvoy at 14.
2017 was really interesting, by the way, because that was, first of all, we didn't know they had a second first-round pick that year. They traded back in later, so we didn't have any plans of that. And they had the second overall pick.
Project that.
And they had the second overall pick. So basically, I didn't do a targets that year because it was, what's the story? It's Nico or Nolan, right?
Taken first, right?
And then 2 years ago, I was telling you this before we started. Joel Farabee was my top pick, top target. That's who they went with. Yeah, I nailed that. And then last year at 11, so I had a couple different names. I had Peyton Krebs at the top of my list for that. And then Matthew Boldy, Victor Soderstrom, Cole Caulfield, and Vasily Podkolzin. And
obviously, it's tough to tell. It's also recent to have any sort of grade.
Sure, and it's like they were all good names. I think everybody had some hype around most of them. But
yeah, regardless. I really liked Peyton Krebs, but I didn't see him sliding all the way to 11.
Right. So all right, here we go.
All right,
2020. Let's get to the targets.
You have proven that your track record is pretty decent here. So.
All right. So the name at the top of my list is Jacob Perrell.
Okay.
That's who I see being a really good fit. You need a guy. First of all, I think it's a wing. It's more of a winger's draft. I don't want to say it's more of a winger's draft, but to say it like that. But I think if you need a winger,
just to give our listeners a little bit of context, Jacob Perrell is a right wing from Sarnia, the Sarnia Sting of the OHL, and the man is a goal scorer.
Yeah, 39 goals and 70 points in 57 games is pretty darn good. I think
the kid can score. And we're talking about the Flyers adding kind of a top
right. And I mean, he's creative. He's creative. He anticipates the game really well. You know, he's got the ability to work his way through. Like he's got some speed. He's not the best skater, but he's got some speed. He can work on the skating a little bit. His consistency's got to get better. But all in all, he's a talented player.
Yeah, he's a little rough around the edges, but
you find me somebody who isn't in the 20s though. That's the thing.
Exactly.
Like you're gonna find somebody who's rough around the edges
and straight into the NHL more than likely.
And I'm trying to be what I'm trying to do when I make this my target is be very realistic about who's going to be there at that time. You know, sure. I'd love to tell you that the best player that they could get in the draft is somebody who is commonly ranked in, if I look at some of the
I
other
would love to
wingers.
see Cole Perfetti slip to 23, but it's not going to happen. He's going to go top 10.
Well, and Cole Perfetti is another one of those guys who's kind of like a hybrid. So he's he's listed on 3 different draft guides as a center, not a winger.
And he's going to play wing at the NHL level.
I think so too. I mean, let's put it this way. If there's a name that I like, and let's put it this way, by the way, for what it's worth, so Jacob Perrell is ranked. Hang on, I got to find it here on this one. They might have listed. Did they list him as a center in the one? Hold on.
I mentioned the Athletic earlier, and Corey Pronman actually has the Flyers taking Jacob
Perrell
in the 23 spot.
No, there's let's just say there's two draft guides that I have in front of me that say one says 16th ranked, one says 19th ranked, and then another one will say 28th. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we talked about kind of after that first 7 or 8, most of the rest of the round is kind of a toss-up, and it kind of goes based on organizational need and
in fairness, by the way, Future Considerations also has him ranked as the 23rd prospect.
Yep.
In the draft. So it's on par with it. Now to add some other names to the list, that's the guy for me personally. Like I just think that's the best one.
I really like
a couple of other wingers that do intrigue me though, that I've liked reading about, that I think have good ability. Tyson Forster. He's played with Barry last year in the OHL, and again another guy who's got some scoring touch. He had 36 goals and 80 points in 62 games with Barry. That's a good sign. Don't think you're going to see him come up immediately. Obviously, I think it's going to be a longer development for a lot of these guys. But he's got the ability. He's got the ability to skate well and score, and that's I think again what you're looking for. I added another name that people will probably hear a lot about, and I think the thing about this one that I put him lower on the list for is, I think you could trade back and still get this guy. Okay. Like if we're not talking 23, I think you could trade back and still get this guy, Lucas Reichel.
Okay.
I think Reichel will be there a little later in the first round. I just don't know. It's tough to say. Like there's a lot of people do their boards differently. Right. So I think but I think he could be there. And, in terms of other guys, now I'm going to get into the, if they slip, start paying attention names as targets.
I have a name on here that I would like to mention. Yep.
Go ahead, because I want to see if we match up.
Defenseman for the Prince Albert Raiders of the WHL. If Caden Gooley is available at number 23.
That's the defenseman I have on the list.
would like the Philadelphia Flyers to select Caden Gooley because I think this kid is going to be a monstrosity at the NHL level.
Now, I want to talk about 2 other names that I have on there because I have him as well as my defenseman. He's the target defensively.
Man.
Well, because let's just wait.
In 3 years, if your top 4 is Provorov, Gooley, Sanheim, Myers, you're in real good shape.
Okay, and this is the reason why I say that if he slips, go for it.
Yeah.
We talked about this last week. Sanderson, Drysdale, they are probably your top 2.
Yeah, Jamie Drysdale's not getting out of the top 10, neither is Sanderson, more than likely. Top 15 max.
And then there are the next 2 on everybody's list commonly, Braden Schneider and Caden Gooley. And I think that Gooley's got the best shot to get there. Like, I think he's the one who's going to – like, he's ranked –
just a little hair lower.
I mean, there's one guy – Hockey Prospect actually had Braden Schneider higher than Drysdale in their book.
Wow.
By one spot, which is really interesting.
And Jamie Drysdale is going to be a very good NHL player.
But for what it's worth, 2 different guys – like, Gooley's got 11 and 14 in 2 guides and then 22 and 25 in another. He's still a first rounder, but there's one section that goes – last 10 picks of the draft is where you'll find him. And then there's another that goes top half. You know what I mean? Like it's interesting how that dynamic plays out. So that's the only defenseman I really put on the list. I'm really fascinated with 2 guys and they're both playing for the same team, I believe. Let me pull up one of the guides and just get that confirmed. But I believe they are playing for the same team. Let me see if I can find the one name.
Either way, there's a lot of very likely to be a lot of really good players available for the Flyers at 23 here.
Yeah, okay, they both are. So both are playing for Chicoutimi in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League.
Okay.
Dawson Mercer, who is, I think, continuing to just go on an upward trajectory, but Hendrix Lapierre, who, by the way, has one of the best names in the draft, just in general.
Absolutely. First name Hendrix, come on now. He's no Bobby Brink, but he's pretty good.
Now, for what it's worth, by the way, the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League is the only CHL league that started.
Okay.
They're playing.
Yeah.
Hendrix Lapierre had a 4-point game on Friday night.
Whew, that's okay. That's decent.
Yeah. And
now again,
to my knowledge, the knock on him is he can't stay healthy.
Huh. Well, do you want to spend another first round pick on a guy with health issues?
23, I feel a lot better about it than 2.
Oh, well,
You know what I mean? Like, let's put it this way. Let me look at the exact, because I wrote it down. So, where is it? He had a shoulder injury 2 seasons ago that kept him out or that limited him to 48 games. Then the problem was last year a concussion did shorten his season. So that's where
and concussions are. We talk about that.
They
are,
but if he's already showing he's coming back and starting a year fresh, like like at that point in time, it's a matter of stay healthy, not it hurt your performance. Right. Like he's very clearly at this level good. I think it will hurt his draft stock. So that's the thing. Like I think it will hurt his draft stock, and that's why I'm sitting here saying, you know what?
And he could slip.
Here's a guy who on just about every board I can find is going in the 13 to 15 range. If he slips near 10 spots,
you might just on him.
No, but if he slips 10 spots, you might want to scoop somebody like that up, because I'm sure there's boards out there that have him ranked right up there as like, oh, he's 12th on our list and he's not going. Why is that?
Right.
And they know the reason why, but they're going, we still think he's 12th on the list. And I do think that very recent, because I think I heard he had a good preseason too. So I think that stands out a little bit. And I'll add one more name to the mix too. Dylan Holloway, and he's going to Wisconsin, so he's a college kid who I think
another guy.
And I think that
setting a timer on you take him, you put him in college and say, all right, come when you're done.
Right, and not only do you set that timer on him a little bit, but
just like they did with Cam York last year.
But look at all the other ones they signed too. Like this is another Tanner Lashinsky, another Wade Allison type, like where you can just stick him in that system for a while, let him play and let him go.
Let him come to
the only question
every year.
The only question I have about that is that down the road you got to ask yourself, when are they going to play again? Like, and I wonder if teams shy away from the college level kids because of that, because they go, your season's really unknown. Like at least the Q is playing again, and the OHL and the WHL have tentative dates that make you think, all right, they're going to go at some point. Like there'll be this, they're going to do this. They're still going to play the World Juniors at some point in a bubble, but still like.
Here's my thing with the college kids though, is if you don't plan on getting this guy for 3 or 4 years anyway, what's the harm if they're a year late, right? Like guys don't forget how to play hockey. He's still going to come back whenever they start up, even if it's not until next year. He's still going to be a talented hockey player. I
just wonder if teams look at that and go, well, we got a guy who's playing in Europe already, or a guy who's playing in the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League already. Maybe we'll take him so we can continue to evaluate him, because you got guys who are sitting there not being able to do anything. And it's been a weird year. Like they even said, the scouts have been doing stuff by watching video more than they have actually.
A lot of video scouting this year.
It's weird. But
so we're talking about guys who we don't necessarily expect to contribute right away. And in that vein, how about a couple of these names for the second round? I know you said you were looking at the top 50 list, and the Flyers' second pick is number 54. Do you have any names lined up for that pick? Any names you're looking at you hope might slip a couple of spots out of the top 50 and land in Philly?
For a defenseman, I would say Ryan O'Rourke sounds like a good name. He's kind of in that, there's a couple of guys that have him all the way up as a late first-round pick, but, like, there's a couple that have him sitting in that 38, 39 range, and it's not really a defenseman's draft. So because of that, I almost wonder if there's going to be a run on wingers and centers late, things like that. A winger that I've seen that a lot of people have mentioned that the Flyers could be interested in is a guy, Luke Evangelista, who is a smaller size kind of guy, but kind of fits that mold of that 50s, in that 50 plus range of overall picks.
Right.
So I think that that's a guy who you could see them go after. Believe it or not, I mean, I mentioned, there's guys who have Forster, who I mentioned kind of ranked down lower on that list. Jake Neighbors is another winger I'd look into who's kind of got a shot to be in the second round range. If you're looking for a center, I wouldn't hesitate against a guy name that we're familiar with. The last center on 2 of the lists was Jean-Luc Foudy, who is Liam Foudy's brother.
Okay.
And I think we've seen what Liam Foudy can do with Columbus in a small sampling size. And I wouldn't, that's a guy.
Did he get drafted last year, or was it 2 years ago?
I think 2 years ago.
Okay, but he still jumped in and started contributing fairly quickly.
So he's another one who I think you'll see a lot from.
Yeah, and there's definitely some names there. And like we talked about earlier, it's kind of a crapshoot, and you kind of have to look at who has fallen to you.
And I'll add one more name to the running, because we kind of touched on him last week, I think. And I don't think he's going to go to the Flyers, but don't be surprised. Stranger things, I guess. We talked about Ridley Gregg a little bit, Mark Gregg's kid, who Mark Gregg adamantly did not want the Flyers to scout because he did not want them to feel like they were doing
Conflict
his
of
kid a favor.
interest, right.
But he is really that good. Like, honestly,
I'd
think
take him.
16 to 18 on him because he could go that
Yeah.
range.
I agree.
So he's got a lot of potential to go high in this draft. Like, and when I say high, I'm not talking top 10. Like I'm saying, but he's gonna go higher than people think. Like, I think he's gonna be he might be top 20.
I agree. One more thing about kind of the Flyers' general draft strategy moving into the later rounds, I wanted to mention. We talked earlier about how the cupboard is pretty stocked. The Flyers are in a pretty decent spot in terms of prospects and picks in the future and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't mind this team going out and taking a little bit more of a risk, right? In the third, fourth, fifth round, you take that guy who had one great year in Europe, but nobody really knows much about him. Like, I would like the team to take a little bit more of that kind of risk. And I think they're in a position where they can, right? Because they're not worried about, oh, we really need a defenseman in the future. We really need more forwards in the system. Like, we kind of have that on lock. You can roll the dice and go for the big, you can go for the lottery ticket at this point.
I'm really interested to see how they break it down like that too. Like I said, with the leagues that are currently playing or the ones that sound like they're going to play soon. And I definitely know I want to see them keep it balanced because, you're going to, like I said, you're going to see them take a goalie at some point in time. I wouldn't be surprised that with 6 other picks,
I wouldn't be surprised
four forwards and 2 defensemen.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a goalie in the 4th or 5th sounds about right.
Yeah. Just a guy that you can, again, if you scratch it off and win $1 million, then you scratch it off and won $1 million. If not, you rip up the ticket and throw it in the trash. No big deal. It's one of those things.
Yep.
But all right. Well, until we get any more news, I think that's kind of it for today.
That is kind of it. And buckle up, everybody, because I think it's gonna be a really interesting week because we started to see some stuff rumbling around at the end, like at the weekend and stuff like that. And this is gonna be the week for action. I mean, they're literally cramming the entire offseason into about a week's worth of time. So by next week, we're gonna have a ton to talk about.
I believe I mentioned it on last week's show, but I'm not sure. After next week, we will probably be switching to every other week through the quote unquote summer. However long the off season is going to last.
The quote unquote summer where we're going to be wearing long sleeves all the time.
Oh, I'll be wearing shorts still, but I'm just that kind of person.
Well, that's fine. I'm not.
So, but yeah, we're going to come back next Sunday with a lot of news, right? We got we're going to have draft picks. First round on Tuesday, the rest of the draft on Wednesday, and then on Friday, free agency opens.
Right, and we'll see what happens. I mean, chances are, I don't think that there could be things that happen later on, but I think no, I'm saying there could be things that happen later on in whatever the off season is, but for the most part, this is going to be the week for it. I'm like I said, I was willing to go out on a limb and say I think you're going to see a new contract for Phil Myers this week, and then you're going to see a lot of new draft picks, and we'll see what free agency brings. I mean, he said, Fletcher said they're not going to be players, but stranger things.
All right. I'm going to get into our plugs here in just a second, but give me 2 great people for our listeners to follow in terms of draft coverage, free agency coverage, things like that. I'll throw one out first. Elliott Friedman. If you're not following Elliott Friedman, it's Friedge, HNIC, Hockey Night in Canada. FRIEDG. Whatever. Search Elliott Friedman, it'll pop right up. He's up there.
An easy one to find.
He's the best in the game. Right? As far as I'm concerned, he is the number one. He is the Waj of the NHL. Like that's it. He's the guy.
Okay.
I don't really have another one, but
so you're gonna lean on me for 2.
Well, listen, I'll throw another one out after you throw your 2 out. It's fine. I'll come up with something.
Okay, well, I got an easy one for I'm looking up a name for the free agency side of things because there's a guy. Okay, here I got him too. Okay, so for free agency, I'm gonna tell you a decent one to follow, and they've missed on a couple of things before, like in the past. So I know I'm not saying anybody's perfect with this. I mean, listen, for free agency, I think the legend of Bob McKenzie is always a go-to because he's always got his finger on it.
What are you talking about?
Semi-retired, and he's still got his finger on the pulse.
He said he was retired, and then he started trying to break a Jack Eichel trade.
Yeah, I know, right? So I of course him, but David Pagnotta of the Fourth Period is a good follow. He has a lot of stuff pretty quick. So I think there's a couple others who do for like TSN and stuff like that. Renaud Lavoie has a lot of stuff for TSN really fast. Okay. So he's a good follow too for free agent stuff. For draft stuff, this is easy. For draft, I'm going to tell you guys, go out there and look for Grant McKegg. He is he's the guy who puts together the recruits draft guide that I referenced during the show today.
Any relation to the greatest name in the NHL, Greg McKegg?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay.
But he helps to put that whole thing together, and there's a lot of stuff. Actually, as a matter of fact, if I look at it really quickly, where is the recruits guide on this list?
You know what? And I have my other one, but for the life of me, I cannot remember the guy's
because
name.
I think recruits, by the way, if I'm not mistaken, the recruits guide in particular, one of the guides, I'm not sure if it's this. Yeah, I think recruits actually. Let me find that page in the guide really quick. It's far down the list. Okay, yeah, recruits actually had for their guide this year an article that specifically focuses on the Flyers draft that Bill Meltzer wrote.
Okay. Yeah.
So Bill Meltzer contributed to recruits guide, which Grant McKegg puts together. So there you go. That's a good follow. And he tweets a ton of stuff that ties into these picks. Like he just tweeted something about quotes from an interview with Jake Sanderson, or quotes regarding Jake Sanderson from 2 different scouts. So I always love reading scout quotes that some of these guys get because it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one guy I'm thinking of, and I can't for the life of me remember his name. I think he used to write for The Athletic. Big Boston guy. Pete Blackburn.
Okay.
If you're not following Pete Blackburn and you like the NHL, you should be following Pete Blackburn. He's phenomenal. He's hilarious. He's informative. It seems like a good guy. Pete, you're welcome to come on the show if you hear this. While I'm throwing out Twitters, I might as well throw out ours. We're on Twitter at YWT Podcast, so make sure to give us a follow there while you're following a whole bunch of people. While you're following a whole bunch of people, make sure to follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso, as well as our partners over at Sports Talk Philly at Sports Talk PHL at Flyerdelphia. You can also find our show pretty much everywhere. We release it every Sunday at 8, soon to be every other Sunday at 8. But I can be found everywhere: iTunes, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, probably. We're all over the place. And you can also find the show on sportstalkphilly.com, as well as articles surrounding the draft. Kevin talked about them today. I'm sure they will be very, very active this week over there at sportstalkphilly.com.
I will.
Can you confirm that? Yeah,
I will. That's what it means. I in addition to posting the podcast tomorrow morning on the site, we'll have I write an article that'll be based off of some of the things that Chuck Fletcher said during the week, and Brett Flair too as well. The Targets article comes out on Tuesday morning. I also break down usually recent picks at the number that the Flyers are picking. So I'll give you some names from 23, and then draft day coverage. Just mainly tweeting more than writing articles. I'll write about the first round pick specifically, and then day 2 I will only write about it after the day's over. So the day will be over, I'll write about all the second day picks, recap, and then do little mini scouting reports on all of them in one piece and wrap it all up. I mean, it's going to be a busy week though, because free agency is going to kick right in 2 days after. I usually have a week to recover from all of that, and I don't now. So
it sounds good though. I'm definitely looking forward to reading those and getting kind of familiar with who the new Philadelphia Flyers are. And
I usually try to avoid writing too much about them before they're drafted, because I don't like people to think like, oh, this is who they're getting. Like I have no clue. It's once they're here, then we'll talk about what people say about them more.
Exactly. And you can join us next week to listen to us talk about them even more in depth. And until then, we'll see you next time.